Thunder, perfect mind is a marvelous, strange poem. It speaks in the voice of the feminine, of the feminine divine power, but one that unites all opposites. One that speaks not only to citizens, but aliens, to poor and rich. It's a poem which sees the radiance of the divine in all aspects of human life, from the sordidness of the slums of Cairo or Alexandria to the people of great wealth, from men to women to slaves.
Next.
I'll read.
Here's the mic.
Oh, actually, Robinson, she raised it.
Okay, John. Thanks. Thunder Perfect Mind may have been written in Egypt. It's probably written by somebody who knows the traditions of Isis and of Jews. It shows that this movement grew up in a world in which Jewish, Egyptian, Greek, Roman traditions are mingled and mixing and well known to many sophisticated people. All you had to do is travel around the city and you saw all these images and these various religions and these various cultures mixing, from Elaine Pagels, author of Gnostic Gospels.
Okay. Gnostics sought knowledge and wisdom from many different sources, and they accepted insight wherever it could be found. In addition to Jewish sacred literature, Christian documents, and Greco-Roman religious and philosophical texts, Gnostics studied religious works from the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Zoroastrians, Muslims, and Buddhists. All such sacred texts disclose truths, and all were to be celebrated for their wisdom. Marvin Meyer, scholar of religion, professor at Chapman University.
Gnostics loved to explore who they were and from where they had come, and hence they read creation stories, such as the opening chapters of Genesis, with vigor and enthusiasm. The Gnostics carried to their reading a conviction that the story of creation was not a happy one. There is, they reasoned, something fundamentally wrong with the world. There is too much evil and pain and death in the world. And so there must have been something wrong with creation. Also Marvin Meyer.
The demiurge, creator, is ignorant, tragic, maniacal. Sorry. Marvin W. Meyer, 1948-2012, scholar of religion, professor of Chapman University. Rather than pinning hope on clergy and traditional places of worship, these heterodox Jews, as well as Christian Jews, chose to look for a light inside. Willis Barnstone, born 1927, American poet, translator, biblical and Gnostic scholar.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure now to welcome back to Brooklyn former BSEC member Donna Minkowitz. Donna has just completed a tour of her novel, DONNAVILLE. She's also the author of the memoirs, Ferocious Romance, which won a Lambda Literary Award, and Growing Up Golem, which was a finalist for Lammy, and for the Judy Grahn Nonfiction Award. She's a former columnist for the Village Voice, and her writings has also appeared in the New York Times Book Review, The Nation, Salon, Slate, and The Advocate. Minkowitz is a recipient of a GLAAD Media Award, the Exceptional Merit Media Award, and an NLGJA Award for Outstanding Journalism, and an Art Omi Residency Fellowship. Let's welcome Donna.
Thank you. Thank you, Lajira. And hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Works best if it's about. About over
Peter, just
there?
under your face.
Wonderful. Okay. So it's great to be back with you today at Brooklyn Ethical. Today I'm going to talk to you about the most radical religion I know, Gnosticism, a religion that was started by heretical Jews and Christians and others around the 1st century CE. And just a note about that term, when I say CE, that stands for Common Era, which is considered a more neutral way of describing the years that are normally referred to as AD in our culture, the time after the birth of Christ. AD stands for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. So CE is used by people who want to acknowledge that not everyone accepts that religious designation. So when I say 1st century CE, I'm referring to the 1st century after Christ. Okay. Imagine a Bible that begins like this. God said, I am the Lord thy God, and there are no other gods but me. Then a voice came out of the deepest heaven and said, Thou liest, God of the blind. Or think about what it would be like if your major religious text had a passage like this. Then the ruler God and his friends came up to their Adam. When they saw his female counterpart speaking with him, they became very excited and enamored of her. They said, Come, let us sow our seed in her, and they pursued her. And she laughed at them for their witlessness and their blindness, and in their clutches she became a tree, and left before them her shadowy reflection resembling herself, and they defiled it foully. Gnosticism is the most radical religion I know because it is the only one that entertains the idea that God is evil and urges us to rebel against his bullying, rapacious, jealous rule. Gnosticism emerged all over the ancient Mediterranean in what was known as the Hellenistic world, areas that spoke Greek as a common language and were ruled by the Roman Empire. Gnostic texts were written and promulgated by Jews and Christians in Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Persia, Tunisia, and also Rome and France. Despite being labeled a heresy as soon as the 2nd century CE, Gnosticism lasted on into the Middle Ages, generating a popular version in medieval France called Catharism that was associated with the troubadours, as well as other medieval versions in Iraq, Iran, and China. Some of this ancient religion actually survives today in a religion in contemporary Iraq and the Iraqi diaspora called Mandeism, and it possibly also survives today in a few villages in China in Manichaeism, which was at one point a very influential religion led by the prophet Mani that has lots of Buddhist influences. Okay. Gnosticism is known as a syncretic religion, which means that it put together images, ideas, and beliefs from a wide variety of sources. Platonist philosophy, some of the more paradoxical parts of Judaism, Zoroastrianism, early Christian belief, Greek and Roman pagan religion, and there's definitive evidence, Buddhism. Scholars say there was far more cross-pollination between different cultures at that time than we usually imagine. So before I get into what the Gnostics believed, I believe strongly that the historical context under which anything happens is extremely important. So first I want to talk to you about the context under which we're meeting here today, speaking to each other. You know, as you all know, while we're doing this, the president and his underlings are trying to establish fascism in this country. They're trying to make people terrified of speaking out. They're trying to consolidate all government power in the person of Donald Trump. They're brutally and illegally rounding up immigrants and detaining them in terrible places with a view to making us all, citizens and immigrants alike, terrified of being put in those terrible places ourselves. It's a very pertinent time for us to be talking about Gnosticism, which could be thought of as the original anti-fascist religion. In many ways, our situation today, and particularly the shock we are experiencing on a daily basis, is not that different from the circumstances under which Gnosticism was originally conceived in the 1st century CE. The Romans had brutally suppressed a revolt against their rule by the Jews of Palestine and continued to brutalize that population to prevent further rebellions. During and after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem and the exiling of Jews into a diaspora, both Jews and Christians, and we should remember that Christians at this time also were Jews and very much identified as Jews, both Jews and Christians were tortured, enslaved, and put to death by the thousands by the Romans to instill fear. For this combined population, now spread over the entire Mediterranean, this was a time of horror. During such a time, how to deal with injustice and how to think about injustice as a constant part of life became burning questions. I would say, well, it should be present tense, they become burning questions. I would say they become burning questions for everyone, not just religious people. How to reconcile such constant injustice with the spiritual side of life, or simply with the fact that we love life and life makes us happy. What do we do with this love of life or this sense of the world as a whole and beautiful thing when we're confronted by fascism? But when you talk about this in terms of a religion, the questions get even sharper. For many of us in ethical culture, a central problem with most religions is what is called the problem of evil. How could an omnipotent, entirely good God possibly create our world, which is so full of evil and suffering and injustice? Something I really dislike about most religions is that they make evil entirely human beings' fault. They never blame God, who ostensibly created the conditions under which the suffering happened. Unlike most religions, Gnosticism asks this question and supplies an entirely new radical answer. Evil is God's fault, and we should blame him. It is, thankfully, a bit more complicated than that because Gnosticism also sees sources of holiness beyond the bullying creator who controls this world. But I will take you through Gnostic cosmogony and explain. First, I'm just going to get my water bottle because I'm a great guzzler of water, so I want to make sure I have a lot of it. Okay. All right. Sorry, people on Zoom. I am coming back. All right. So, okay. So first, a disclaimer. Like every other religion, Gnosticism is diverse. Not all Gnostics in all times and places believe the same thing. Some parts of Gnosticism conflict with other parts of Gnosticism. Some Gnostic texts conflict with other Gnostic texts. I'm going to get into some of the contradictions, especially around feminism and around sex, a little later. But in what follows, I'm going to talk about the parts of Gnosticism that are most radical and that I believe are most helpful to us. So in Gnostic thought, the creation of the world is a mistake that arises from arrogance. First, there's a kind of androgynous holy oneness which decides to produce many other holy entities. As in Kabbalah, which Gnosticism later gives rise to, maybe this is where the slippage happens. Why does this holy oneness decide to produce other entities that are less perfect than it? Then one of these offspring holy entities, wisdom, decides to give birth on her own without input or any genetic material from a partner. The resulting offspring, who is sometimes referred to as an abortion, is alternately named Yaldabaoth or Sakla, which means fool, or Samael, which means blind god or god of the blind. This being is the real source of evil, and he is identified with the God of the Bible. He decides to make a world of matter and utterly control it. He wants to be worshipped and obeyed, and his only interest in creating human beings is to have something to dominate and control. Unlike the beings who preceded him, he only understands power as power over, and there is nothing holy or spiritual about him. So along these lines, Gnostics take the creation story in Genesis and turn it into something completely different. I'm going to read to you from their version, from one of about 48 Gnostic texts that have survived. This one is called The Reality of the Rulers, and it dates back to approximately 350 CE. It was originally written in Greek, but the text we have was translated into Coptic, an ancient Egyptian language. The chief of the rulers is blind. Because of his power and his ignorance and his arrogance, he said with his power, I am God, there is no other but me. When he said this, he sinned against all. This speech rose up to incorruptibility. Then there was a voice that came forth from incorruptibility, saying, You are wrong, Samael, that is, God of the blind. His thoughts became blind. And editor's note, I just want to note that incorruptibility is a female noun, and she is treated here as a female character, a divine being. She represents something called the female spiritual principle. As incorruptibility looked down into the region of the waters, her image appeared in the waters, and the authorities of the darkness became enamored of her. But they could not lay hold of that image which had appeared to them in the waters because of their weakness. For they, that is the rulers, were from below, while incorruptibility was from above. So you may notice something else extraordinary that keeps repeating in the Gnostic texts, which is attempted rape of various women or female entities on the part of Yahweh and his friends. The bit about an attempted rape of Eve that I quoted to you earlier is from another text. And as far as I know, Gnosticism is the only religion in which rape is identified as one of the most terrible crimes that can be committed. In many of the Gnostic books, Yahweh and his friends attempt to rape either a human woman or a female divinity, and she resists them, foils their plan, and laughs at them. This is one of many genuinely feminist things about Gnosticism. Okay, to go back to the text, this is the reason why incorruptibility looked down into the region, so that by the Father's will she might bring all into the union with light. The rulers, these are the ruler gods, the rulers laid plans and said, Come, let us create a human that will be soil from the earth. They took some soil from the earth and modeled their human being after their body and after the image of God, that is, incorruptibility, that had been shown to them in the waters. Okay, what happens next is a little bit difficult. Basically, they try to use the body of Adam as a tool, as another way to rape the image of incorruptibility in the waters, because they are just so intent on raping someone. All right. They said, Come, let us lay hold of incorruptibility by means of our modeled form, so we may seize it by means of our modeled form, not understanding the power of God because of their powerlessness. And the chief ruler breathed into his face, that's Adam's face, and the human being came to be animate and remained upon the ground many days. But they could not make him rise because of their powerlessness. Like storm winds, they persisted in blowing, that is, they're blowing into Adam to make him rise, that they might capture the image, that is, the image of incorruptibility, which appeared to them in the waters. And they did not recognize the identity of its power. Afterward, the Spirit saw the animate human being upon the ground, and the powerful female spirit came forth from the adamantine realm. It descended and came to dwell within him, and the human being came to be a living soul. So let me explain this a little. Yahweh and his fellow rulers are unable to put a spirit in Adam because they are not powerful enough and because they are evil. But the female spirit, which is connected to incorruptibility, comes and puts a soul in him because it wants him to be connected to this good thing, genuine life and spirituality. Further down in this text, after the passage I read to you at the beginning of the talk, where the rulers try to rape Eve and she repels them and laughs at them, there's a version of the Garden of Eden. In this version, the snake is good. In fact, it's called the instructor, and it's also an incarnation of the female spiritual principle. And the snake tells them to eat of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, which the rulers don't want them to have, because the rulers want them to be ignorant and powerless. Eventually, there's yet one more attempted rape in the text, and I apologize to those of you for whom this is, one too many mentions of rape. Nerea is the daughter of Eve, and Noah does not allow her onto his ark, which when the rulers have decided to make a flood and drown most of humanity. So I love this. Nerea blows on his ark and sets it on fire. Then Yahweh and his henchmen attempt to rape her. She tells them, You are the rulers of darkness. You are accursed. I am not your descendant. Rather, it is from the world above that I am come. The arrogant ruler turned to her with all his might, and his countenance was like a blazing fire. He said to her presumptuously, You must service us, as did also your mother Eve. But Nerea turned with power, and in a loud voice she cried up to the Holy One, the God of all, "Rescue me from the rulers of unrighteousness, and save me from their clutches at once." And a great angel named Sagacity comes down and rescues her and teaches her, quote unquote, about her root. So I know this all may be a little difficult to follow, and it's certainly very weird as well. Gnosticism is some weird stuff. But what I have just read to you is what is known as the classic Gnostic myths, which appears in a number of their texts. Basically, the creation of our own world and of human beings specifically is a work of these would-be gods who are tyrants and bullies and just want to dominate everything and to be worshipped and obeyed. But unlike the so-called gods, we, human beings, are actually holy because the real holy forces in the universe have implanted themselves in us, and they are compassionate and care about us, and they are our root. And a corollary, I would add, is that when we fight for human dignity, we are fighting for the holiness within us. And all domination and enslavement comes from these evil forces. So that's what's called the classic Gnostic myth. And if you've heard the word gnosis, which Gnostic comes from, the gnosis or knowledge that people receive is the knowledge that we human beings are connected to holiness, to the original holy oneness, and that we don't actually have to serve Yahweh and the other horrible rulers who rule this world. Some scholars suggest that gnosis is better translated as recognition or perception and refers to recognizing or actually becoming acquainted with this holy force that is our root. But there's another side to gnosis, which is self-knowledge, as when Plato said gnothi sa auton, which means know yourself, and that this was the most important knowledge we could actually have. Many of the Gnostic texts refer to the importance of self-knowledge, and there is sometimes a sense that knowledge of God and self-knowledge can be one and the same thing. And this brings up another Gnostic text called the Thunder Perfect Mind, which develops the connection between God and evil rather differently than the classic Gnostic myth. And I'm going to read to you a little bit from that. It's spoken in the voice of a female divinity. Do not be ignorant of me anywhere or any time. Be on your guard. Do not be ignorant of me, for I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the barren one, and many are her sons. Why, you who hate me, do you love me, and hate those who love me? You who deny me, confess me, and you who confess me, deny me. You who tell the truth about me, lie about me, and you who have lied about me, tell the truth about me. For I am knowledge and ignorance. I am shame and boldness. I am shameless. I am ashamed. I am strength and I am fear. I am war and peace. Give heed to my poverty and my wealth. Do not be arrogant to me when I am cast out upon the earth, and you will find me in those who are to come. And do not look upon me on the dung heap, nor go and leave me cast out, and you will find me in the kingdoms. And do not cast me out among those who are slain in violence. But I am compassionate, and I am cruel. Be on your guard. Do not hate my obedience, and do not love my self-control. In my weakness, do not forsake me, and do not be afraid of my power. For why do you despise my fear and curse my pride? But I am she who exists in all fears, and strength in trembling. I am she who is weak, and I am well in a pleasant place. I am senseless, and I am wise. Why do you curse me and honor me? You have wounded, and you have had mercy. Don't cast anyone out or turn anyone away. I am an alien and a citizen. So that's just a bit of the Thunder Perfect Mind. It's a highly unusual religious text, and it's quite different from many of the other Gnostic books we have. It also dates to around 350 CE. The most striking thing about it for me is the fact that it describes God as both good and evil, both weak and strong, or more accurately, God is actually talking to us in her own voice, and she says, I'm both good and evil. I'm compassionate and I'm cruel. Be on your guard because I might hurt you, but don't turn away from me. Please show me mercy. And she is both weak and strong, both right and wrong, just like us. By speaking about herself in the first person, the female divinity who is the narrator invites us to think about ourselves, our paradoxes, and our multiplicities. I find it incredibly moving that, like everything else in the universe, this God is both vulnerable and powerful. Again, just like us, and similarly to the way Christians see Jesus. But we get back to gnothi auton, know yourself, which the text invites us to do. We, like her, are sometimes shameless and sometimes ashamed. We can hurt others, and we can also be hurt. To me, it's a compelling view of God that God is not special or profoundly different from anything else in the universe, that God is of the universe and like the universe, like us in being a multiplicity of things. To me, this is pantheism taken to a delightful extreme. The readers of this text still find holiness in the world, but they do not identify that holiness with impregnable power. That should be unimpregnable power, or with unalloyed goodness. Instead, they celebrate the holiness in what actually exists. Which brings us back to gnothi auton, know thyself. The point of self-knowledge is to know the bad things in you as well as the good things in you. In Jungian terms, to be aware of your shadow. Once you're aware of everything that is in you, including the hurtful parts, you can control what you choose to express. You can choose which actions to take and not to take. One of the most startling things about the Gnostics is their view of gender, which is profoundly different from the traditional understandings of gender in the Jewish and Christian texts that have come down to us, and also from the misogynistic views prevalent in Greek and Roman culture. In what I've quoted from you today, I may have emphasized female divinities a little bit, but there's plenty of male ones and androgynous ones as well, just to say. But first, the various supremely holy beings discussed in Gnostic texts are often referred to as hermaphroditic, or you could say intersex or non-binary, or as female. God is referred to as the mother-father, the parent, or the female spiritual principle, and many passages in the Gnostic books combine genders in ways that can be astonishing to those of us who thought that people in the ancient world saw gender as fixed and immutable. For example, Barbelo, who is the first offspring of the Holy Oneness, is clearly identified as female, but is also called thrice male, and the thrice named androgynous one, and a masculine female virgin. So we don't know what any of this means to them, but we do know that all these gender shifts are considered by the Gnostics aspects of the divine. And in another text, a female divinity called Primal Thought says, I am the voice. It is I who speak within every creature. I have come in the likeness of a female. I have revealed myself in the thought of the likeness of my masculinity. Later she says, I am androgynous. I am both mother and father, since I copulate with myself and with those who love me. I am the womb that gives shape to the all. And in a rather perplexing way, the following occurs in one of the Christian Gnostic texts, the Gospel of Philip. Simon Peter said to the disciples, let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. I think that means big Christian life. Then Jesus said, I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit, resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. So this is obviously very strange. Contemporary readers may not know what to do with this. It's not necessarily feminist. It's nice that Jesus in this text wants to welcome women into the kingdom of heaven, but it's hard to celebrate that we have to become male to do so, whatever that means. Which brings us to the contradictions within Gnosticism. The scholar Elaine Pagels, in her brilliant book, The Gnostic Gospels, was the first to popularize the Gnostic books after the majority of them were discovered in a single archaeological find in 1945. Pagels pointed to many different pieces of evidence that Gnosticism was feminist, and also highlighted the fact that their contemporary Christian critics fiercely criticized the Gnostics for having women involved in positions of leadership in Gnostic churches, including as preachers. Now, I have to say that we know very little about the social practices of the Gnostics or how they organized their congregations. Some of the only evidence we have is from their critics. There is also evidence that some non-Gnostic Christian congregations at the same time period also cultivated the leadership of women, and that this may have been more typical of early Christianity than most people assume. But other scholars of Gnosticism are far more dismissive than Pagels of the idea that the Gnostics were feminists or particularly radical in their social organization in any way. This may be because those other scholars are not feminists, and Pagels is. Pagels, who is an amazing scholar of the ancient world and the early church, may in fact be right. But there certainly are a number of contradictions in Gnostic thought, and one of them concerns how we are to think of men and women. There is some sexism in some of the Gnostic texts. For example, when Wisdom or Sophia decides to make a baby on her own without her male partner and gives birth to the evil chief ruler Samael, she's blamed in some of the text for letting evil into the world by believing she can make a baby without a man. In some of the books, the arrogant mistake that leads to evil might be hers, that she foolishly assumes she can create life on her own. On the other hand, in an allegorical way, there's something nice about the idea of wisdom erring by thinking that it's all that is necessary, which could be interpreted as pointing to the dangers of pure rationality without letting in emotion or any other influences. Under that analysis, it is the arrogance of reason that leads to the creation of evil. Then again, women are often the strongest and the most defiant actors in Gnostic stories, whether they're human women or female divinities. And I just want to get into one other contradiction within Gnosticism, which is their views on sex. We don't know much about the sexual views of the early Gnostics in terms of what they thought was good for humans to do, but their texts are full of sexuality, especially gods having sex, gods masturbating, androgynous gods having sex with themselves in a way that leads to offspring, the goddess who calls herself a whore, and so on. And there's a curious scene in one of the Christian Gnostic texts, the Gospel of Philip, where Mary Magdalene is called Christ's consort, and where it says, "The Lord loved Mary Magdalene more than all the disciples and kissed her on the mouth often. The others said to him, 'Why do you love her more than you love us?' And the Savior replied, 'Why do I not love you the way I love her?'" So the implication is definitely that Mary Magdalene has a sexual relationship with Jesus and that this is a thing to be celebrated. By the time we get to medieval Gnosticism, something very curious is going on. I've already mentioned the Cathars, who were a very prominent Gnostic sect in France. They were closely connected to another medieval Gnostic group called the Bogomils, who lived in what is now Bosnia. So most Gnostics from all time periods believe that our material world is evil. But the Cathars and the Bogomils believed that sexual reproduction was a bad idea because you were just creating more children for the evil ruler, Sakla, to rule over. You don't want to make more children for him. But unlike mainstream Christians at the time, they did not believe that sex in general was evil. Instead, they believed that the kinds of sex that don't lead to reproduction, for example, oral and anal sex, were holy and much better for people to do than heterosexual intercourse. That's why the Bogomils are supposed to have given rise to the term bugger for anal intercourse. This is absolutely true. It's in the history books. So of course, as a queer person, I'm pleased, even tickled, that parts of Gnosticism celebrate queer sex and actually declare it holier than straight sex, because that's not what usually happens. But of course, what we really want is a religion that celebrates all kinds of sexuality that do not harm anyone, including heterosexual intercourse, of course. And I think I'll end there and take some questions. Lujara, should I go over there? Do you want to stand here?
We can stand together.
We can stand together. Okay, great.
We stand together.
Yes.
We fight the world together.
Yes.
Any questions, comments?
Comments? Yes.
Microphone.
Well, the trouble is that,
Oh, he's outside. There it is. Good, good.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I'll just have to listen to it again.
Is Gnosticism still practiced today, and if so, where?
Well, oh, Mike, sorry. Here, let me go to the, sorry, Lujara. So yes, it's practiced in Iraq and the Iraqi diaspora, especially among many people who left after the Iraq War, the second one. Those people are called Mandeans, and that's a version of Gnosticism. There's also, I mentioned, maybe a few surviving places in China where another version is practiced. There are some contemporary people, Americans and Europeans, who also say they are practicing Gnosticism based on ancient texts. I'm not fully convinced by their versions, but I may not have explored them sufficiently. And I think I saw a hand over here.
okay, here's the mic.
Oh, thank you. You use the expression Gnostic Gospels once
Yes.
or twice, but usually text. Are those interchangeable?
Oh, so, right. So, Elaine Pagel's book, which brought Gnosticism to the awareness of non-scholars for the first time, she used the word, anyway, her text was called the Gnostic Gospels. I don't call all of them Gospels because not all of them are about Jesus or are Christian. I think a lot of people are not aware that there were Jewish Gnostics, and many of the books don't have much to do with the idea of Jesus. So some of them are called Gospels and are openly Christian, and Jesus is a character, and some of them are not. They really differ among each other. That's why I say Gnostic texts to refer to all of them, and some of them are Gospels and are called, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, and so on. Sure.
Question. This sounds, I read Ellen Hagel's book, but it was years ago, and I don't remember a whole lot of it. But I have in my mind the origins of this in Platonic dualism, where the life of the mind and logic is always right and never fails, whereas the life of the body and the real world that you touch is evil, and that the Cathars were part of that heresy which was suppressed by the Catholic Church, I believe. Was there any time when the Gnostics controlled a substantial society or even a country or a geographic area?
I'm not aware of them controlling a society, but it certainly is true that within the ancient Jewish and Christian world, perhaps particularly in the early Christian world, their ideas really flourished. I mean, in that time period, let's say before the 4th century CE, these ideas were freely exchanging with what we would call more traditional ideas, and what have become the canonical books of the New Testament then had no more authority than many of the Christian Gnostic books. So many people were influenced by these ideas and sharing with them. Maybe they would go to a Gnostic thing one time and they would go to or read another book another time that, now has become part of the Christian canon. I don't think there's as much information about how this played out in the Jewish world. But it's undeniable that Gnosticism, Jewish Gnosticism, did lead to the creation of the field of, what are we going to call it? It led to the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah, of course, is the body of Jewish mysticism that started in the medieval world, that is still influential today and became tremendously influential in Judaism and is still today, and I think really shows signs of Gnosticism, because in the Kabbalah, God decides to pour himself into all these vessels, and he's too much for the vessels, and he shatters the vessels, and that's how evil happens, because there's all these little fragments of God everywhere. So as someone who doesn't want to let God off the hook, I like this very much in Kabbalah, where God creates evil because he decides to pour himself into these vessels, and it's an unfortunate experiment.
We do have here Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi, Donna. Good to see you. The question, I haven't had a chance to read Donnaville yet. I've been very busy, and I was wondering if Donnaville had a religious institution, and if it does, whether it was Gnostic or ethical culture or something else.
Well, thanks, Tom, and it's really nice to see you too. And so which way should I look? Should I look at for the camera? Look over there. Very good. So in I would say Donnaville, which is my novel that came out in the fall, Donnaville doesn't have a particular religious orientation. There is a character called the Divine Mother, but she is neither omnipotent nor entirely good. She's pretty powerful and she's pretty good, but she actually does hurt people. She hurts another character in the novel, and she comes to acknowledge that hurt. So I was happy. I did want to put, I'm someone, I would call myself a pantheist. I'm someone who does feel a sense of holiness but I don't believe it empirically exists. But I wanted some of that holiness to be incarnated in my novel, but I didn't want to have a divine being who was perfect, because that's not the kind of divine being I believe in. So thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have questions?
I can speak.
Well,
it's a hybrid platform, so the people on the Zoom can't.
Okay. Well, we have more.
I have a question up
Yeah.
here.
Thank you so much for the talk. I've kind of been a pseudo-theologist of Mandaism, completely unrelated, because my last name is Manda, and so, again, unrelated, but personal interest. I would recommend for people that are interested, there's a professor at Butler University, James McGrath, and he has done the only translation into English of the Mandaean Book of John, which is their primary religious text. And it's really fascinating. He's also written on kind of the life of John the Baptist. And it's fascinating that, the Mandaeans see John the Baptist as their prophet. It's the only old non-Christian religious tradition that uses baptism. And what this professor kind of suggests is that there's maybe even an argument that, Jesus was baptized through John the Baptist's tradition. John the Baptist was a strong critic of Herod and, the Pharisees prior to Jesus's coming. And so, I don't know, John the Baptist, it's kind of cool how he fits into this.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, if I could, the gentleman over here was talking about whether Gnosticism didn't, kind of come directly out of Platonism, in the sense that, it's really only the mind and ideas that can have holiness, and the body is evil. And for those of us who like the body, like me, believe in the body, it is a problem in Gnosticism that many of them believe the world of matter is evil. Although, as I said, they get around it. Some of them get around it by some kinds of sex are good, just don't make babies. But I also want to say I find them a bit, they certainly incorporate parts of Platonism, but I find them a bit different because they're more political, I'd say, than Plato. They're much more anti-authoritarian than Plato because they explicitly identify what they don't like with rulers and domination. So it's not as much body and spirit, but rulers and kind of a power beyond those who want to dominate us.
We have a question from Rita on Zoom.
It's Rita. I think we can't see her face.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Donna. Thanks. I appreciate your talk, and it's good to see you. Is there an introduction to Gnosticism that you can recommend?
Yes, and Rita, it's wonderful to see you too. Oh, sorry. It's wonderful to see you too, Rita. I have missed you. And yes, even though it's a little old, Elaine Pagel's The Gnostic Gospels, which is still in print, is probably the best introduction to Gnosticism. There are also, she's a great scholar. She's written a lot of books on ancient religion, and the Gnostic Gospels is quite good. There also are several compendiums of the Gnostic texts. One of them is edited by Marvin Meyer and Willis Barnstone, who are some of the people the quotes came from earlier. Another one is edited by Bentley Layton. I think the Marvin Meyer and Willis Barnstone one is better. I don't particularly like their introductions, like what they say about Gnosticism. I think Pagel's is much better in interpretation, but if you want to look at all the texts, the Barnstone and Meyer is a good anthology. But I would start with Elaine Pagel's.
And that's Pagel's?
Yeah, Pagels.
Thank you. Take it easy.
You too. Mm-hmm.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, I know the Jews have this idea that that the religion is based on words. And so the words matter, and you study these words, and if they're interpreted differently over time, that interpretation still holds, just kind of like the common law in our country where judges will make rulings and then they have to take into account previous rulings. Catholicism has something like that as well, where there's a religious court, there's interpretations, there's a set system for evolving those interpretations through edicts from the Pope. Whereas other religions, a lot of Christian sects have this idea of revelation and personal interpretation, and God sort of is able to be reinterpreted over time, and there's not like a text that has this kind of life to it. I'm wondering where Gnosticism sits on that spectrum. Is it a religion where all of these texts are holy texts, like the Bhagavad Gita or the Torah, or is it just a bunch of people, and they realize that religion is a human endeavor, and it's reinterpreted by people?
My answer to that is, unfortunately, I don't know. We know little about how the Gnostics saw their own texts. I mean, at least the early ones, the ancient and medieval ones. I mean, we can talk to contemporary Gnostics in Iraq and ask them, so until this discovery at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945, I think he was a trader, found in an ancient jug a whole bunch of scrolls. until that discovery, Gnosticism was only known to scholars through writings by anti-heretical Christian leaders, mostly in the early church, also like in the medieval period. So there were some interesting things in there, and people wrote books about the Gnostics based on what their critics said about them, but they didn't actually have the texts. So now we have a bunch of texts, but my understanding is there is still very little information about, what Gnostic congregations would have been like, what worship would have been like. So unfortunately, I can't tell you about that, but I will say, I'm not a scholar of Judaism, but in my understanding, Judaism is also based on reinterpretation in the sense that argument is encouraged, argument and revisiting, actually, I say this means something else. Well, I say it means this. And when the, how do I say this? When the Kabbalah first began to be imagined, I guess as a group of texts and also practices, that was the injection of a more mystical, kind of, I'm just going to say what I imagine of God into Jewish thought. So I wish I could answer you about how the Gnostics believed in their text, but I can't.
I'm curious about the evolution of the word agnostic. Do you know about that?
No, I'm afraid not. I don't think it has to do with Gnostic. So it means, like not knowing. So it'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't know if God exists.
I was wondering if there was a connection.
I don't think so.
We have any more comments here? Any more comments? Questions? Heretical remarks?
No, go to more demonstrations. Fight Trump.
That's what we're doing.
Oh, yes, good.
Hi, everybody. This is my first time here. I'm here to see my girl over here, Viva. So this is a really nice place to be. But what I wanted to ask you is I love history, but I don't consider myself a historian. I just like to inquire and share. But I wanted to know, how did you get your start in that particular Gnosticism? I kept thinking you were saying narcissism. I was like, okay.
No, it's very funny. I use voice dictation software to write, and my voice dictation kept thinking I was saying narcissism too, and it was horrible. So I have to own up, I'm not a historian. I'm not a scholar. I'm a writer. I have been a journalist. I have written about Gnosticism on some occasions. I first started reading about it when I was in high school. And then I took some classes on it in college, and I continued reading. So you could say I'm a journalist with a passionate interest in Gnosticism. I've read up on it a lot, but I'm not a historian at all.
It sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? One more? No more? Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Donna.